and introduce Rick Demmer. Welcome, everyone.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much, Walter. And really on behalf of Dr. Leo Lagos from Florida International University's Applied Research Center, Dr. Triai, if she's on, the executive director of the Applied Research Center, and just really a host of others. I mean, it's impossible to have been involved in D&D activities in any capacity and not know today's guest and what he's about to share with us. Dr. Rick Demmer, obviously the myth, the legend, the man, is with us today. He's been obviously in this business of D&D activities for 35 plus years. He was a stalwart there at Idaho National Laboratory, where he led several D&D activities and research efforts spanning across the spectrum. My knowledge, and we crossed paths about a decade ago, or coming right up on it as it related to fixative technologies. And anyone, if you type in fixatives on Google, you're going to get 8 out of 10 of the efforts are going to have Rick Demmer somehow associated with those. Several patents, several successful commercializations in the realm of fixative technologies. He also has been a right-hand man for me on our ASTM International E1003 subcommittee, where we've laid some of the groundwork and developing the technology ecosystem with standard specifications and testing protocols for fixative technologies to help across the entire complex. And just one story I'll share before I turn it over, and since he's retired, I'm safe to say whatever I want. I guess this is as much a roast as it is an introduction. I remember at Waste Management a couple years ago, Rick, I think, actually was sitting in and conducting his dissertation defense, if I recall, from out of England. I think it was Manchester or somewhere. And I was like, Rick, I mean, you know, aren't you a little past that? He's like, you're never too old to learn and to keep pushing the envelope and expanding your knowledge. And so he served as not just a stalwart within this community from a professional standpoint, but he's been quite inspirational at the personal level for many and all who are participating in this call. So Rick, thank you, my friend. Good to have you. And we look forward to you know, your presentation and continuing the friendship for years to come. So I'll turn it over to you.
Rick, real quickly, I think Dr. Lagos is on the call as well. I'm not sure if he wanted to say a few words.
Oh, sorry.
Leo, my friend.
All right, maybe we'll loop around later. All right. Rick,
Okay. So thank you. Thank you for inviting me, Walter, and the team over at Florida International. I appreciate that. As they mentioned, I retired a year ago from the Idaho National Laboratory, achieving being a distinguished scientist there. And I wanted to bring not just a dry presentation on decontamination, because I've done hundreds of those, or dozens anyway. I've done dozens of those, but I wanted to talk about some other things that maybe will help you in your career, things to think about as you go forward. All right. So 45 years ago, I was fortunate to be able to address my high school graduation, give one of the graduation talks. And I opened it with a little story, a little anecdote about an old dog that comes along a young dog that's chasing its tail. And the old dog says, "Hey, hang on, what are you doing here?" And the young dog says, "Well, I've learned that the secret to success in life lies in my tail. And if I can catch it, I will have that success in life." And the old dog thought for a moment, and he says, "You're right, success in life lies in your tail. But I've learned that if I go confidently forward, my tail follows me and success follows me wherever I go. And so I can relate to that now, 40 years later, after almost 39 and a half actual years of being at the Idaho National Laboratory. So I started out life as a chemist. And many people, I worked in an engineering organization, summers, a couple of years, and they said, you know, you would make a good engineer. And I was like, no, I'm a chemist. I'm a scientist. So the subtitle to what I wanted to say, and kind of a theme that you'll see going through this presentation, is how I stopped worrying and learned to love engineering. There's always a lot of friction, perhaps, between scientists and engineers, and when it's friendly, it's great. When it's not, that's unnecessary. This iconic picture that we have here is of Slim Pickens dropping a bomb from an airplane out of into Russia in a movie called Dr. Strangelove. Some of you will relate to that. Others, you need to go watch that movie, or at least see parts of it. But it was how they stopped worrying and learned to love the bomb. So I started life as a chemist, a bachelor degree chemist. It was not easy to find a job in 1982, and I landed in the shift lab, so named because the shift lab operated 24 hours, 7 days a week to service the Idaho Chemical Processing Plant, a nuclear fuel reprocessing facility, which we call that the back end of the nuclear system. We had tanks, we had the reprocessing facility, which was about a quarter-mile long, impressive facility, if you can see, and the analytical chemistry that was done on those highly radioactive samples was done in this particular series of small hot cells. Now, you'll notice that this is what I called 1950s technology. We weren't using the more sophisticated master-slave manipulators that I learned to use later on. First, you learn to use, or in this facility, you learn to use the cable tongs, which are basically a stick with a hook on the end. You can open and close the tong finger, but the amount of sophistication was very, very simple in this place. And that's how I learned to do radioactive chemistry. We took a lot of dose. It was not unusual to get a REM, 1R per year for the people who worked at this facility. So I'll describe a little bit of my fantastic, which is imaginative and remote from reality, career. I started at that low rung of analytical chemistry. Essentially, I was a foreman, and I took on assignments with increasing levels of responsibility. That's what they say about you when you enter management. I became a chemist, supervisor, engineer, manager, project manager, and principal investigator. I was never truly satisfied with where I was. After a while, I'd get used to where I was, and I'd want to move on to something else or something better. So I was a little bit of a wanderer, but I found out too that the pay increases when you move into management, and that's an important lesson to learn. I became a recognized expert in decontamination and in nuclear fuel reprocessing over those years. This is me working about 20 years ago in the hot cell at the new style hot cells at the Remote Analytical Laboratory. Fantastic facility, especially compared to the 40, at that time, 40-year-old facility that I'd started in. I also conducted many of the tests at the Idaho National Laboratory for the RDD, or radiological dispersal device testbed. So I'll be talking a little bit about an RDD, a radiological dispersal device. That was in the 2000s, that was the decontamination effort that was very strong, was recovering from a dirty bomb or a radiological dispersal device. In my way of thinking, they're interchangeable, an RDD or dirty bomb. So I became pretty good at understanding a lot of that. And then because of that work, I was able to go off and do simulations and exercises. The first one, the top one there, was out in Philadelphia. It's kind of cool. I'd never been to some of the seamy sides of Philadelphia that we got to work in. And then Columbus, Ohio, we were working in the hot, humid area in Columbus, Ohio, working with strippable coatings. And by the way, those are crap in the high temperature, high humidity areas. So what I want to talk about first is a little bit about the art and science of decontamination. Now, most people, when they want to talk about decontamination, they want to talk about just getting it done. They want to talk about the best decontamination factor, or DF, that you have. But really, a scientist, an engineer that is well-versed in decontamination like myself, we understand that the challenge is about a chemical and physical relationship between the radiological material. So contamination is radiological material for us. Radiological contamination is radiological material that's in an unwanted place. If it was inside the tank or the piping or the vessel or the container that it was supposed to be in, it wouldn't be contamination. But because it's been released from there, it's leaked out of a valve or something like that, that it becomes contamination. And then it becomes a matter of that system of the chemical and physical natures. And I'm going to talk about those a little bit later. It also is important to understand what the customer wants. That's always true. When I was selling vacuum cleaners back out of high school, it was about what the customer wants, but it's more about what the customer doesn't even realize they want. And I'm going to tell you a little bit in a couple of slides here more about some of the things they don't realize, and we have to educate them. I have to educate them as they want to understand. They want some decontamination done, and I have to educate them on what their criteria needs to be. And then also it's about understanding what published results mean. So not all results are level. We call it not a level playing field for the materials that are being circulated about these different decontamination devices. So we developed at the INL clear back 30 years ago, a major matrix, a major criteria matrix. I worked those backwards there, but you can see that it consisted of 5 major criteria. Of course, the 6th is that it has to be safe and environmentally sound. We can't go around using dynamite to blow contamination off of the walls. That's not really safe and environmentally sound, but we can get close to that, actually. So these are the major criteria and how we scored them in terms of an evaluation back in the early 1990s. If we expand that technical performance piece, if we push that down, we go to the operability, simplicity, required development, and cleaning efficiency, then we can push those out, drill down, and this is as far as we went, actually, the third level. What those mean is, for example, how long does it take to train an operator on this method? Some are very quick. Some take a day's or more worth of training. Operating a laser is not intuitive for people. Operating a CO2 pellet blaster is not intuitive. Operating a grit blaster is far easier, actually. So those are, what I do is I go out on that far right-hand side and I score the customer's job for different types of decontamination. So I'll say, okay, let's apply laser ablation to that customer's job. And from 1 to 5 on each one of those criteria. And then based on all that data, typically I try to do about 10 different decontamination technologies. On the basis of all of that data, we can make a recommendation and say, this is the most the best fit for what you're doing. So that's how I'm responding to what the customer wants, but what they're not saying at the time. We also have mined the data. I'm going to introduce the term beauty contest. So we compared side by side hundreds of different decontamination technologies. And from that, we were able to get back data that told us, off of primarily porous matrices, that decontamination effectiveness is inversely proportional to permeability. The more permeable a substrata is, the harder it is to decontaminate. Well, that's not huge, but we had science that backed that up. And then also the chemical solubility of the contaminant affects its ability to transfer through the substrata. So the more chemically mobile chemical is, like cesium, highly mobile, alkaline earth metal, in solution, it's easy to transfer through concrete, for example. So we began to understand those relationships. The data mining was all about the relationships between the substrata, the contamination, and how well we were able to get them off. We also came up with a method of simulating contamination so that we could get testing results, evaluate these different things. And the first ones that we did in 1992 were SimCon 1 and SimCon 2. SimCon 1 was simply salts of cesium and zirconium dried on the surface of stainless steel. And that was loose contamination. What we began to understand is that is a very low bar type test. It gives no range. It's easy to complete, so it doesn't provide any real data. We shifted to SimCon 2, which those same salts were baked into the surface, and it gave a tenacious contamination layer. We've actually codified this with the ASTM now as a practice. So this is an example of what I was just talking about. When you see strippable coating, strip coat testing results, through the mid 2000s, most of that data was available for loose contamination, the low bar type. And strippable coatings were always quoted as being between 90 and 100% effective. But the reality was people weren't seeing that in the field. And that's because, like our tests that we ran in 2011, that green data over there, they were seeing more difficult problems. They were seeing fixed types of contamination. And so it was much more difficult than the loose contamination. So understanding the data in terms of what the test really was about is vitally important. We also developed, a colleague of mine developed these RealCon coupons where we used actual radioactive materials, cesium, cobalt, strontium, etc., on different porous types of material, marble, granite, concrete, and limestone. We did about 400 different tests with those. And we did tests for the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Defense Department. Started out with the Defense DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. So we had a lot of data. It was extremely well QA'd. We had blanks. We had numerous blanks that we processed. So if we had any cross-contamination, we knew about it. All that kind of stuff. It's great data. And we became known as the beauty contest people, where if you wanted to know if one type of contamination method was better than the other type of contamination method, you came to the INL. We also became known for our award-winning decon development research, some of which Joe mentioned earlier. We've gotten an R&D 100 award for developing decontamination technologies. And but less so for that global approach, which was about the criteria and the requirements of the job, understanding the criteria and the requirements, as well as the testing data that you can apply to use to that. I think that's becoming more prevalent now, but it's certainly, I mean, the first thing people ask you all the time is, does that thing work? Well, yeah, it works. It worked in this particular application. So this was our radiological test bed. These are people from, besides the INL folks that were here, we had people from Canada that were testing methods, as well as New Hampshire in that. So any decontamination presentation that I would make should talk a little bit, at least, about some of the different technologies that are available. And I'll start with the simplest, and that is high pressure and heated water. It's cheap, it's available, it's you can buy them and use them quite easily. And they're fairly effective on loose contamination, and I have to say, loose contamination on non-porous type materials. On porous type materials, it's going to remove some contaminant, but it's going to tend to push some of the more soluble contamination further into the surface, making the overall decon harder. I'm going to show you some of that data too. But it also requires wastewater handling. What I've got down there is the old Kelly decon system, where you would recover the wastewater, do filtration and circulation, and reuse some of that. A great deal of decontamination has been done with chemistry. There are about 100 different chemical decontamination systems that are available. And few of them are practiced globally anymore, because some of them are so harsh, so concentrated, and that they will do damage to stainless steel and other materials like that. So the art of doing chemical decontamination is a balance of corrosion versus effectiveness and also waste. And the more dilute, the softer you can make that system, the better. Most of the good decontamination chemistries have oxidation reduction components, redox agents. They use cycling. Typically, they will cycle an acid and a base together to provide solubility, and then they'll also incorporate chelants such as oxalic acid or citric acid or EDTA into their system. There are some good low waste methods available. We usually recommend some chemical decontamination along with all of the mechanical methods that are offered. One non-chemical type methodology, and we looked a little bit at some of those results, is the strippable coatings, which are typically latex coatings, though we've used some polyvinyl alcohol results as well, type materials. It produces a loosely adhered rubber type substance, and it encapsulates the contamination. Now, obviously, if the contamination has gone into the surface, it doesn't do anything there. So the data that I show you is the SIMCON 1 loose contamination removal, quite good, and then SIMCON 2 fixed contamination. You get very little. Well, you get 50% or so decontamination, and that's not a good basis for decontamination. Joe had mentioned fixatives early on. When you talk about strippable coatings, you're also talking to a certain extent about fixatives, and this is a removable fixative. You can use it for pre-contamination to a certain extent. You can fix contamination into a strippable coating sandwich and make it removable that way. A couple of the methods that are very good and sub systems of those methods that you'll see down in the table there are abrasive and liquid abrasive grit, or LAG, liquid abrasive grit. So abrasive grit is like a marvel. It is one of the most effective decontamination processes that you can use, and it's typically very fast. And there are ways to recycle, collect and recycle the grit and remove the contamination fines and reuse that grit. So there are some real advantages to abrasive grit. Very few people use them to that extent. It's certainly not a sexy process, not like light ablation or CO2 pellet blasting that we're going to get to. Liquid abrasive grit reduces airborne contamination. It's a slurry. It's a water slurry of grit. So you can, if done, you can have large wastes, and it's typically incompatible with liquid waste streams. And of course, the data that you see there is extremely high in terms of removal, both on, well, this is on non-porous, but we have seen that data on porous materials, and it's also extremely good. I talk about cryogenic blasting methods. They're different. They're another grit blasting, but they're different. The carbon dioxide pellet, CO2 pellets, are about 1/8 of an inch diameter and maybe 3/16 of an inch long. They sublime as they hit. So you don't get a you don't get a grit. You have very little waste. No secondary waste is added when you're doing this kind of work. Now, the ZOCAD, or zero added waste cutting, abrading, drilling, was something that was developed at the Idaho National Laboratory and now is patented and listed as nitrocision. It's a very high pressure liquid nitrogen blasting technique. And you can see that it's quite effective. It's very effective. And there are several different technologies that are available for that. Now, one of the problems with CO2 pellet blasting is it lost favor for a number of years due to the fact that you eject those particles. You put a lot of energy into the contamination, and it can go quite a ways. It can be resuspended, and you may be cleaning something in front of you, but you could contaminate the entire building because you placed so much energy into that particle, that contamination particle. So you have to work in a enclosed area with probably a downdraft table, a lot of good ventilation. Scabbling and spalling are two techniques. If you want to get into exploding items, like I talked about a little bit early on, there is explosive scabbling that's available. I don't talk about that very much. I mostly talk about explosive spalling. I mostly talk about the traditional scabbling type methods that you almost always, if you're talking about concrete or a porous type material, you almost always have to include that in the evaluation. The picture that's there is the Pentec Squirrel. It's a moderate-sized needle gun. It's actually 3 needle guns together. They're pneumatic devices that use about 1/8 inch diameter needles, a series of needles, and they impinge upon the concrete, and they abrade the surface, and then a vacuum sucks that off into a waste handling system. Very mature, lots of support for that. And then light ablation. I was a researcher in light ablation in the mid-1990s. It's actually there's a technology that's available right now. There's several actually where there are commercial applications for light ablation using this neodymium YAG and fiber optic coupled system. So that is certainly one of the more sexy type decontamination technologies that we've used. And you can see where it's very effective. The results are very good. No additional waste is added, and only small, like nanogram masses of material is ejected during the ablation. Now, I promised you some more results, and these are quite a few of the results that we got out of the test bed, the INL Decon test bed. And this was from cesium-137 on concrete. And every one of these tests is not a single coupon or even 3 coupons. We're talking about something with an N of more than 5. Placing these. You can see Empire Blast abrasive blasting system, very effective, in the neighborhood of 90%. And our data was about 2%, plus or minus 2% on this. Diamond wheel rad release, the best decontamination process that we had. Argon Supergel, our friend over at Argonne National Laboratory, Mike Kaminsky, his super gel there, and then Decon gel. This is the more sophisticated Decon gel. You can see Decon gel 1101 was not nearly as good. This is a strippable coating, and 1108 incorporates decontamination solution within the strippable coating. So that's a more advanced system than the traditional strippable coatings. And if we're getting down to 50% or so decontamination, I place that blue line in there. There isn't much reason to go below that blue line, though I have to tell you that the people who sell these technologies on the far right, they're very anxious, and those are very expensive technologies, some of them. So they may have their application. They certainly do have their application, but it's not the one that we were testing them for. Now I want to switch gears, and I want to go to when I'm talking to a college sort of early career group, I talk about the 5 Ps: publications, presentations, project management, proposals, and promotions, which kind of parallel my career, although the least thing that I'm good at is publications. There are other people who could talk a lot more about this, so I won't do too much. But that's a way of sharing your work with others. It's a way of getting your name out there so that people can say, well, we ought to talk to Joe because Joe has a publication record in this field. Our librarians were very good at helping us prepare publications and helping us understand what magazine or where to try to put that publication into. And initially, you might find that the Brazilian Journal of Ceramics is the best thing for you because they might have a little lower standards than American Scientific, which has very high standards and which has a larger impact. So don't be too concerned about high impact applications immediately. Try to get some publications, some references into some of the lower impact things. Now, I do a lot of presentations. I've been doing them for, like I say, for over 40 years. And it's a good way to tell people what you're doing and who you are. And to make you need to make the best of those presentation opportunities. Everyone has a certain amount of stage fright. I usually am very nervous before a presentation, but once I get going, I relax, and I think I do a pretty good job. But you also should choose a forum, particularly initially, choose a forum that's not too demanding. A place that you won't feel combative, like the Waste Management Conference, which I'm one of the chairs for that. So, and it's we're not there to have a combative type forum. We're there to understand what you do. And I think that's a good way. Now, I have that picture there. I was leading a workshop and presenting at the workshop, but I was leading this workshop on how to decontaminate, how to D&D a experimental breeder reactor. So we had people from all around the world that were doing breeder reactor type work, and we were sharing information, sharing discussion, and that's the best kind of a presentation forum that you can have, to me. Okay. Now, project management, I'm going to talk a little bit more about project management and proposals, but project management, I call dispensing the food. It has typically very little technical ability. It doesn't hurt to have technical ability, and it's important for researchers to understand this project management system and to get to begin to understand the tools and how you do that. It was also a struggle for a chemist who had very little accounting background or very little business background to become more of an engineer that did more project management. That was a huge turnabout for me. Project management is all about schedule and budget. So if you imagine you're building a house and you have to pour a foundation, you have to start somewhere. You dig and you pour a foundation. And that's typically, let's say 10% of the total cost is that foundation. And it takes about 2 weeks to finish. So you are judged on your project management, on your project, really, how closely you came. If you spent 50% of the money, or even 20% of the total money, you're going to be out of budget. You're going to have to take it off of somewhere else. And it's very simple math. But all they're trying to do is, did you accomplish what you wanted to do on time and within cost? Now, when you're talking about research, this becomes a lot more difficult to do project management, because you have a certain amount of time that you're going to be preparing to go into the laboratory. You're going to have a certain amount of time that you're going to be in the laboratory, and then voila, you have a certain amount of time. You have this laboratory breakthrough, which you can schedule exactly. No, you can't schedule that kind of thing. But you can schedule to have a report. You spend a certain amount of time in the laboratory and you have a report. So you have to be kind of open-ended. With research, you have to be kind of open-ended. I hope you have breakthroughs, but they're very difficult to schedule and budget. And if you've done this right, your customer is going to pay you to do presentations and publications, and that's designing your next project, your next house. So it's contributing, if you've done project management right, it's contributing to the overall health of your department, of your project, of wherever you are. Now, proposals are the lifeblood. And accounting's dirty little secret is that you have to balance income and expenses. If you're in a commercial business, the income has to be more than the expenses, or you don't stay in business. And it's called, it equals profit. Okay. So within your department, within your work organization, there's going to be something similar to this. Accountants do not generate income. As a general rule, accountants do not generate income. People who write proposals, researchers who do presentations and publications, they're the ones that generate income. Accountants are very good at cutting expenses. And if the income falls, if no one is doing proposals and no one is writing publications and presentations, pretty soon they know exactly what to do, and you find yourself without a job because you're an expense. Okay. But everyone can help that proposal process. Not everyone can propose, but being involved with that is vitally important. In order to do proposals, you have to understand your market. Like, what is your product? Your product is research about a certain thing. And so you should have some kind of a product that you find at the end. What's the value there? You have to determine that. Who uses your product? What's the market? What's your competitive edge? Why are you the best at doing this? And when you've answered some of those questions, you've done the market analysis so that you can then propose, and you'll know where to propose. You'll be able to understand how to look at the market and how to get your proposal across. Now, promotions, understand Not everyone wants to be promoted. A lot of people love to work in the lab, and that's fantastic. That's great. But understand that the people who are managing, the managers, the project managers, the principal investigators, those kinds of people, they're getting a lot more money. So it's important through your career to advance to those levels, if you can, if that is important to you. And of course, the reason you do that is because that's where the money is. That's why people rob banks as well. This is she's about 5-year-old now, 6-year-old granddaughter, Morgan. And I thought it was great because she's ready to take over the world. Don't be afraid to step out and step into new challenges. Have a fantastic career. Plot to take over the world every day, but be polite and courteous as you do. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and I'll take any questions you might have at this time.
Well, thank you, Rick, for the presentation. Thank you so much for those who are attending. I'll open the floor right now for questions for Rick.
I have a question. John Dixon here.
John?
Yes, Rick, thank you for the nice talk. Really appreciate it. And thank you for the advice on advancing your career in the field of research. Quick question. So what is the difference between loose and fixed radiation?
I should have talked about that. So loose contamination can be easily removed. And typically, when I talk about easily removed, it can either be wiped off with a dry cloth or washed off. So that's the difference between loose and fixed contamination. I thank you, John. I appreciate it. I didn't get that mentioned, so appreciate that.
Okay. As a matter of fact, go Cougs. Yeah.
Go Cougs.
Go Cougs. Thank you. That's all.
Hey, John, I'll add to that too, and Rick will attest to it. As he said, he did an excellent job of taking some of this body of knowledge that he's created over the past 35 plus years and translated that and codified it in the ASTM standard movement that we're kind of pushing, particularly for fixative technologies. And so that exact definition, what's loose contamination versus fixed contamination, is contained within those standards. And we have it right down to, if it comes off under this amount of pressure, it is considered loose. If it comes off under more pressure, it is considered fixed. So since you're a few doors down, I'll share those standards with you. And we're getting ready to update some of those. But the main point being is so that you can test apples and apples and oranges with oranges. Having this stuff codified in a methodical manner really helps us to compare the effect, whether it's a decontamination factor, whether it's ability to immobilize residual contamination, whatever it is. And so, my hat's off to Rick for his participation, and I would encourage others who have developed experimental designs or testing technologies, core operational parameters, inject those in your respective standards, consensus standards development committees, so that you can codify that as well.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah,
hear me now, hopefully. Hey,
Oh,
Rick,
Leo.
good afternoon. My apologies, I wasn't able to get my microphone working earlier, but as always, great talk, and really no questions, but to congratulate you of your career in this area, which have helped in industry immensely. So you mentioned some of the large scale demos and some of the work that we did way back, and all that had built onto where we are now with the commissioning of facilities, not just in the U.S. but also across the world. So thank you for all your hard work and all your service, and I hope you're enjoying your post Idaho life. And it's always good to see you. And in the introduction, I guess you did not mention, or Joe, that you are a Waste Management Symposia Fellow. So again,
Thank you.
very well deserved, and it's always a pleasure to see you there at the Waste Management, and thank you for all you do to that specific conference. So without your contribution in the D&D track, we would, the industry doesn't move forward. So you keep us all on our toes here in terms of what's next and how can we do it better. So
I always try to recognize the contribution from FIU and from Leo and Walter and up today that you guys are training the new generation, and I'm fortunate that I'm being able to see the new generation. At Waste Management, they called me the original gangster, right, for decontamination. So
yeah, indeed. So thank you so much, Rick.
Are there any other questions from the audience? Well, if there are no more questions, Rick, on behalf of Florida International University Applied Research Center, thank you so much for being our speaker today. As mentioned earlier, the recording for this event will be posted on the website link. It's available on the chat. If you please take the time to fill out the feedback form, which is also available on the chat. It will help us determine future tech topics. So appreciate if you guys fill that out. But once again, Rick, thank you so much for your participation, for collaborating with us, and hope to see you soon. This concludes the Tech Talk, and thank you all for coming and being part of this Tech Talk.
thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Rick. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Who cooks?